Totally. The customer promise needs to follow on from the mission, and then underneath the customer promise needs to be that customer strategy. And you need to make sure that everything within that customer strategy is leading to maintaining that customer promise.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host Vineet, and we are here really glad to have all of you join us today. On this show, we talk to CX and technology experts from around the world. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform available across 14 channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries in every domain and use case. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc. magazine, Tech World, CIO, and many others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest. Katie Stabler is the founder and director of customer experience at CULTIVATE Customer Experience by Design. She is the co-author of the Amazon #1 bestseller Customer Experience 2. She's driven, passionate, and focused. She developed a recovery process to identify and remediate issues, as well as develop a framework for customer journey design, which brings experiences to life through workshops and immersion sessions. Welcome to the show, Katie. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So, folks, before we dive into our interview with Katie, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders around the globe. So, getting back to our interview, as an accomplished customer experience leader responsible for developing customer focused strategies within organizations, what are your guidelines to build a strong focus on continuous improvement and customer care?
That's a great question, because continuous improvement is just crucial to any organization, no matter how big or small. My approach would be three-pronged, really. So first of all, you have to make your insight visible. So whoever is collecting that data, whoever's gathering that feedback and insight, whether it's voice of the customer, customer journey mapping insight, it needs to be shared across the teams. The people who are responsible for making the changes need to see this insight. If they're just seeing the overall output, but they're not actually seeing what's being collected and what's being provided, there's a massive gap, and transparency is so key. So first of all, make insight visible. Make sure the people who are responsible for the change can see what you are collecting. And then secondly, those people who are responsible for the change need to start making those changes. So as a CX consultant or a leader, whether or not you're an official CXO or just somebody in charge of that part of the operation, you really need to support your teams to make the changes. And small changes are great, because when you start to make the changes, you can start to track the benefits, and then its proof is in the pudding. So when you can show the benefits of continuous improvement and show the benefits to the organization, more and more buy-in will start to be collected. And it really is about creating that organizational wide buy-in. We want everybody in the organization to understand that continuous improvement is just part and parcel of everyday operation, and make sure that those who are leading with that are the people who are making those changes and showing those benefits.
Totally agree with your point, Katie. So, like customer experience officers should not like work in silos, but in union with other departments as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So, how can organizations develop an operational strategy across multiple departments that nurture teams to achieve targets?
Yeah, it seems like a big task, but it is so achievable. My first point is make sure that your targets are targets that are making a difference. So not just a target for a target's sake. I'm a big believer in the balanced scorecard, making sure that KPIs are relevant and appropriate to teams, and that you're measuring the right things. So first things first, get that right. Also, transparency and openness. So you don't just want to give a team a target, you want them to be bought into it, and you want them to be part of that process. So right at the very beginning, at the strategic part of developing what your KPIs, what your targets are going to be, make sure that you've got people from those departments involved in that decision making, and that everybody understands why that target is there and what they're there to measure. Alongside the open and transparency, I think it's all about sharing the results. So again, you've got these targets. You of course want to share them with the relevant teams, but not just the numbers, not just the data, but the understanding behind it, so that everybody really, really understands what position they're in. And if the targets are going really well and you're achieving them, why? What's happening? What's making the teams achieve those targets? And likewise, if they're not going so well, make sure that the whole team understands why and that they're part of the solution. So if perhaps performance isn't quite where you want it to be, not being a dictator in what needs to happen, but engaging your teams and asking them what they think needs to happen in order to get the performance back on track.
Correct. Yeah. So how can how has the pandemic transferred consumer behavior? And do you think these psychological effects are going to be for the long term?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. And I think, it is different between industries and sectors. So every consumer, is going to have a slightly different reaction to what's happening. But I think overall, customers, consumers, they're understanding. So, worldwide, we're in it together, whether you're a customer or whether you're on the other side of the business. I think people are understanding and they're considerate and tolerate the changes that organizations are having to go through. And if organizations are not getting it 100% right now, I think there is a higher level of tolerance between customers and an understanding that we're all in quite a difficult situation. But on the flip side, I also think customers are expecting more right now. So let me give you an example. Last year, I was speaking to the customer experience manager of a high-end UK department store, and she was giving me some anecdotal examples of some customer conversations she'd had recently about exactly how the pandemic was affecting them. And one customer gave a great story about how he would normally pop in on his lunchtime. The department store was right near his office. He would nip in, he would normally get some lunch from there, and he would browse and maybe buy. And that was an everyday occurrence, something simple, reasonable expectations of what he'd expect from customer service. But since the pandemic, when we could go into UK stores, we can't right now, but when we could, he said his shopping experience had completely changed. He said it wasn't just going in for a lunch now, it was an experience. It was one of the things that he could do, like going out for a day. Going to a department store was like going to a fairground. So he expected so much more from that experience. He expected the staff to be incredibly attentive, and he expected just a higher level of customer experience than he previously did. So I think we're in a funny situation right now where, yes, customers are tolerant, but yes, they also expect more. And we expect innovation because now we're seeing that businesses can innovate and that they've been able to pivot very quickly. So I think companies have got high standards to live up to moving forward.
Yeah, totally. And so do you feel like is the feedback that we take is enough, or like analyzing the entire customer journey will give us a much better picture to take decisions?
I think we absolutely have to do the customer journey. You've got to understand it right from the point of when they've first heard from you to the point that they're leaving your business. You need to look at those touch points. And now more than ever, customer emotion is coming into it a lot more. So I'm a big fan of looking at empathy experience, looking at how customers' feelings over your interactions can change the way that you navigate business with a customer. So absolutely, you need to be looking at as many touch points on that customer journey as possible and really understanding the differences between what your customer may have looked like a year ago to what your customer looks like now.
Okay. So we need to go beyond like what metrics we have already established, like NPS and CSAT, and go maybe towards the emotional side of it to understand better.
Totally. Totally. And NPS, there's a lot of controversy around NPS in the customer experience world. I think whatever metric you use, it can work. You've got to make sure it works for your business, but it's not about the number. That's the most important thing. It's what's behind the number. And it really is around that qualitative understanding of your customer experience. So not what score they gave you or out of 1 to 10, but why they gave you that score.
Yeah, totally agree with your point. So how can we understand, consumer behavioral psychology in a B2B sphere?
Yeah, so Business to business, I think the same principles apply very much as what business B2C. So B2B, B2C, one and the same. However, there are definite distinctions between B2B. So typically it's a longer decision-making process. There's normally more stakeholders involved in a business to business interaction. There's normally longer relationships, and one of the key focuses is retention. You really want to keep that B2B customer. And they also expect enhanced product knowledge. But saying that, there's somewhat of an archaic view on that, because I think a lot of that can now apply to B2C. More and more and more customers are expecting more and more and more. So I think the principles between B2B and B2C can very much be cross purposes, but you do need to remember some distinctions. And typically it is that a business to business customer wants more from you or expects more from you.
Yeah, correct. So, Katie, any other sound bites you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think the most important thing with customer experience is, across the globe, different countries have a different approach, and I think from a UK perspective, we're somewhat behind still. And there's a lot of organisations who are yet to really understand the benefit of intentional customer experience. So what I would say is that customer experience can be one of the biggest drivers of any organisation's bottom line. But it's incredibly important for the whole organisation to understand that every individual who works in the organisation can impact customer experience. It's not just the responsibility of the customer experience manager or customer experience director. It's an organisational wide strategy, and it needs to be developed as an organisational wide strategy.
It needs to be within the mission and vision of the company.
Totally. The customer promise needs to follow on from the mission, and then underneath the customer promise needs to be that customer strategy. And you need to make sure that everything within that customer strategy is leading to maintaining that customer promise. And it should be linked to, your marketing strategy, your sales strategy. Everything should be holistic in the approach when it comes down to customer experience. But as I said before, I think the key thing is just helping all individuals in the organisation, whether or not it's directly or indirectly, to understand that they impact the customer experience in some way, and they all have to take a bit of responsibility on that.
Yeah, because many times it's like the finance department must be like, why are we being pulled into this customer experience? So like, how do you think they, as customer experience professionals, we should like handle that?
Well, I think engaging them. So I worked in a particular initiative, which was all around customer service incident recovery.
Yeah.
And we always had the finance team involved. So whenever something significantly detrimental happened to a large population of customers, we'd have this incident meeting where senior leaders from different departments of the organisation all came together to identify and fix the problem. And finance were always in that room. And why were they in that room? Because at the end of the day, what we were going to do was going to cost that business money. Correct. So they needed to be in there and to be part of it and to understand why we were asking what we were asking. And very quickly, they became more and more engaged in customer experience because we were pulling them into that. So engaging teams in your initiatives and making sure that they can understand why they're there, super important.
Correct. So thank you so much, Katie, for giving us your time. Your insights were really valuable, and I'm sure our audience is really going to enjoy this interview.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah. So folks, we'll be back with a brand new episode and with a new expert very soon. So stay tuned, and we'll see you around for the next one.